Michael is the director of the Climate and Energy Policy Program at the Stanford Woods Institute for the Environment. He runs a multidisciplinary team of lawyers, data scientists, economists, and public health experts focused on 3 areas: environmental justice, the energy transition, and wildfire. Michael's served in a variety of roles for the state of California, including as a wildfire commissioner, as a member of the California Catastrophe Response Council, and as an advisor to the California Senate, Public Utilities Commission, and the Office of Electric Infrastructure Safety. Michael has a JD from Stanford Law School, a PhD in Ocean Sciences from the University of California at Santa Cruz. So please help me welcome Michael Wara.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just say this feels to me like almost like a fire prom or a fire wedding. I can't turn around without running into people that I haven't seen in a long time, or I've only met on Zooms in the pandemic, and it's just really an honor to be speaking to all of you today, and a little intimidating, frankly. So Bill asked me to talk about my perspective on the state of wildfire in California and the West, and I think I'm going to sort of break this into 4 parts. I sort of think of, you can pick your date for the beginning of the modern wildfire era in California. I'd probably say 2015, and some of the fires that occurred in that year, especially the utility-caused fire and the fire that was caused by bad hot tub wiring in Lake County. But I'm going to talk about the past 5 years of experience because I think they really inform what we've achieved and also where we've fallen short and where we need to do more work, and then talk about my perspective. It's just one, but a perspective on where I'd like to be in 2028, in 5 more years. So the first thing to say is, in some ways, for a lot of people, for the public, maybe, the modern wildfire era either began in October of 2017 or November of 2018 in California. I just picked 2018 because it's 5 years, right? The loss in Paradise was the loss of life, the loss of a community's integrity, really was kind of an anchor point in this lived experience in our state. I still remember the experience of seeing the smoke coming in over the Bay Area and hopping on Twitter and seeing the fire scanner people talking about, reporting what was going on in real time in Paradise, and just feeling a deep sense of dread and worry for the first responders that were on the ground there and the people that were on the ground there trying to get out. I think it's unfortunate, but we saw in some ways a repeat of that experience just a few months ago in Lahaina, where we had a catastrophic wind-driven fire that turned into a conflagration and entrapped many, many people, far too many people. I think the fact that we haven't had that kind of event again in California has to be in part due to skill. There's also some luck, and I'll take luck. Particularly over the last couple of years, we've had great conditions that have significantly moderated fire behavior, but I think we should not rest easy. And as we think about what we've achieved in California, I think one of the objectives for the next 5 years has to be to spread that knowledge and skill and expertise to other areas in the Western United States that have not yet really incorporated that knowledge. So one aspect of the last 5 years that we've all come to be much more aware of, beyond the risk of conflagration and avoiding that outcome, is the impacts on air quality away from where fires occur. And this is, the picture that I certainly vividly remember it, being locked down with my children at home and waking up to this sky during the lightning fires. And I just say, work that we're doing at Stanford and work that many others are doing are just showing how the growth in fire behavior in both area burn, but also intensity, is driving significant deterioration in the Western United States in our air quality. It's really reversing the gains that we've made since California invented the approach to clean air that was then federalized in the Clean Air Act. And over the next, we're California and the Air Resources Board has kind of done their best to use the flexibility they currently have to allow us to do the things that we think we need to do. Jenny mentioned beneficial fire as a key component of that, and I think the next 5 years are going to be even more challenging, but this is a place where we've made a lot of progress. We need to spread that progress to other states in the West and share the knowledge that we've developed about how to use existing laws, because let's be real, Congress isn't going to change it, and maybe change regulation to facilitate better air quality, reduced exposure, especially for low and moderate income Californians who maybe can't go inside a modern home that's well sealed, air conditioned during these kinds of events. Another experience of the last 5 years that has been personally affecting for me, this is a picture in the aftermath of the Castle Fire, looking at a giant sequoia grove, is just the loss of, I think many people that live in the Sierra, love the Sierra, feel an intense sense of loss over the last 5 years, and a loss of places and communities and just a landscape that they have grown up with, that they think of as, that is their kind of multi-generational experience of what it means to be a Californian. And the last 5 years for me have really been a wake-up call that we need to be very focused on this issue, or that loss will accelerate. And we've seen a lot of positive steps, again, here, to help stabilize, I think, the situation, but there's much more work to do. This is a picture of this, unless you're an electric transmission person, you wouldn't necessarily know what this is. That's the C-hook sitting on the tower of the Caribou-Palermo line that broke and caused the campfire. And another aspect of the last 5 years has been an incredible degree of investment in California in improving the safety of our electric infrastructure. We're not done. There's still a lot of controversy about how best to take the next steps down that path. Work we're doing right now also illustrates that while California has done a lot, the rest of the West is far behind. And this is actually starting to significantly affect our ability to mitigate climate change. If you read the papers about the Inflation Reduction Act, you'll read about how folks on the side of the house that I work on energy in, we're very focused on accelerating, planning, siting, and deployment of new electric transmission in the United States. That is critical to achieving our climate goals, which ultimately is going to be critical to keeping the wildfire problem under control, right? The U.S. needs to do its part. So does everybody else. There's that meeting in the UAE right now focused on that, and it's complicated and not easy, but we have an important role to play. And the fact of the matter is, it's getting harder and harder to finance new transmission in the West because of the wildfire risk. This is a fundamental problem that we need to solve, and we need to solve it both physically with better safety and also with financial tools. And of course, you can't really think about wildfire if you're a California homeowner, at least where I live, without also thinking about the insurance situation in California, which is, over the last 5 years, has gotten a lot more complicated for people that live in rural and suburban parts of California. And this really began in 2017 with the Napa-Sonoma firestorm, but it's accelerating, and it's accelerating for reasons that don't actually have much to do with fire. We had a great fire year this year, maybe the best in a quarter century, but everybody was probably struggling to make their 1,000 hours. But at the same time, the insurance situation the deterioration is accelerating, in part because of inflation. Something that has very little to do with wildfire, but puts the insurers into an even more difficult position. So what have we achieved over the last 5 years? I think one key aspect of the kind of experience in California is that there's very little debate anymore about what the problem is. This is a figure, it's complicated, it's like noisy climate data, but it's focused on something called vapor pressure deficit, which is basically how thirsty the atmosphere is. This is on a seasonal basis. And it's showing you that, going upward on this figure is a thirstier atmosphere, an atmosphere that's going to dry out dead and live fuels more quickly and is going to support extreme fire behavior more readily. And what we've observed in California over the last couple decades, an important explanatory factor, doesn't explain it all. There's lots of other factors going on here, and I want to emphasize that, right? Land use decision making over the last century, a history of intense fire suppression, but there is also an atmospheric trend that's making all of those problems worse. All of those things are things that we have agency over. We can control them, right? We can make better land use decisions. We can make better land and forest policy making decisions. We can support the use of beneficial fire in all its forms. We can't really control this in California, so we have to deal with it. But I think 5 years ago, people hadn't really grokked that this was a thing and the significance of it to the lived experience of Californians. And what this basically shows, right, is a gradual trend toward drying of the atmosphere. And the thing to keep in mind is that trend doesn't stop, right? And if you think about what we'll experience in 2030 and just draw a horizontal line over to what it looks like, it looks a lot like some of the more challenging and difficult fire seasons that we've had. And if you think that this paper, the paper that this comes from, argued that climate explained about 2/3 of the change in fire behavior. I wouldn't say that we really, I wouldn't want to stake a claim on how much climate change explains of what we've experienced, but there's definitely a significant signal there. Is it half? Is it 2/3? I don't know. Is it somewhere in between that number? But it's there. It's not going away. And so we need to think about doing all the other things that we can control, all the things that everyone in this room is doing with their lives in order to manage this problem, because this problem is going to get worse. The reality is that this entire curve to 2050 is driven by the emissions that have already occurred. It doesn't matter what we do between now and 2050 as a planet, this will happen. And that means fire seasons ahead that are outside of even our lived experience today, which feels pretty extreme, having lived through it. That makes all the activities of everyone in this room incredibly important. I think we did not fully understand that 5 years ago, and we do now. And that is important because it motivates action. The other thing that we have managed to do, especially in California, to a lesser degree at the federal level, is to really put a serious down payment down on the kinds of changes that we need to take, both in terms of our evacuation preparation, right? Both also in terms of firefighting, which Governor Newsom emphasized, right? The investment in the state firefighting resources that we really, really needed to be more effective, and in terms of the way that those resources are utilized, the integration with weather analytics to pre-position firefighters. Think about the Kincaid fire in 2019, where CAL FIRE was able to position its assets so effectively to be where they needed to be when that ignition occurred. We've made a huge down payment as a state, really unprecedented in increasing the use of fuels treatments, community preparation, prescribed fire, but it's a down payment. And I think it's important to realize that. And it's a down payment that occurred when money was effectively falling from the sky because of the pandemic. And now we're entering a different budget environment, and we need to find ways to achieve, to make the mortgage payment every month. And that's going to be the challenge of the next 5 years, I think. But we should celebrate what we have achieved, because I think, you can drive around California today, and it looks physically different than it did 5 years ago. We haven't done the things we need to do at the scale we need to do them yet, but we've made a lot of progress. And I think that progress really deserves the credit, and the credit really does go to the Newsom administration and the legislature for being willing to find ways to spend money on these issues, which are not always exciting, especially in quiet fire years. I'd also say that we've made an important start in increasing the use of beneficial fire. And when I use that term, I mean, probably everybody in this room knows what that means, but I just want to be clear that I mean cultural fire, prescribed fire, and also managed wildfire. And this is the managed wildfire end of things, right? A hot shot putting fire on the ground in a nighttime firing operation. We need to do more of all of this, but we've made a lot of progress in the last 5 years, and I think that also needs to be celebrated and recognized. Finally, we've made a good start on integration of new technologies and data analytics into how we approach this problem. And this is just one easy example to pull, right? But obviously the fire camera network did not exist in its current form 5 years ago. And more than that, the data analytics that have been built on top of a lot of these tools have gotten much better. And we're not stopping here, right? We're moving toward launch of a constellation of satellites that will provide even better data detection, detection of fire starts, and do that on a much larger geographic scale than is possible for cameras. So I think there's a tremendous amount of new technology entering the space that's very positive. At the same time, firefighters are conservative people because their lives depend on the things working that they use. And I think there's a reasonable amount of caution in integration of new technologies, because if you are responsible for a team of people in the field, things have to work. You can't make mistakes. And so that's a different venue than is maybe typical for startups and entry of new technology, where there's a lot of tolerance for beta versions of things, and finding that fit for the incredible comparative advantage that California has in technology in the firefighting space has I think been a challenge, but it's something that I see both the agencies and the industry increasingly finding a way to work with each other. And I see that as tremendously exciting, because I guess ultimately the other thing is what technology does at its most fundamental level, and this is well illustrated by Intel's innovation in chips, is it makes people more productive. And there's lots of talk about growing the fire workforce, and we need to do that, but we also need to make the fire workforce as productive as possible with the people that we have, as skilled and trained as we need to retain them and then give them better tools. And I think we've started to do that in California in important ways over the last 5 years. I guess the last thing I'd say is I see the Wildfire Commission report as a major achievement. It's still unclear what will follow from that, but as a statement of consensus about where the community needs to go, and community much more broadly defined than has been typical in the fire services, I think it's a major achievement that will have lasting impact. And I personally am deeply grateful to all the folks who have contributed to that work, because I think it will be read for and used as a sort of touch point for policymaking, particularly in Washington, for many years to come. And it's not something that we had prior. And so this is a major contribution. And it should be viewed as a community achievement, because every single recommendation in that report was a consensus-based recommendation. And I wasn't a part of this directly, but I know from working in the international climate space, getting to consensus on anything with a large group of people, try deciding where to go to dinner with 25 people, right? It's not simple. And so this is a major accomplishment of fire diplomacy. Where have we fallen short? I think this is the number one place. This is the place where I start, and the place where we need to do much better, and we need to do that with some urgency, and figure out ways to meet the needs of the workforce that is the foundation of everything that we do. So, I'm sure probably everybody knows what's been going on on the federal side. CAL FIRE is not in this situation, thank goodness. We compensate our firefighters in California much better than the federal workforce. But the federal workforce faced a 40% pay cut as of this fall. And the real issue here is retention of the mid-level skilled operators, right? How do you have a family? How do you have a life and work as a federal wildland firefighter? California can't win this fight without the help of the federal government because they own the land. They are the federal response is critical, and the partnership with the federal agencies is critical. And if they're under-resourced, if they're fielding teams that essentially have 1 year of experience, right, we cannot solve this problem, and we're putting people at risk. And so I would love to talk about expanding the workforce and growing the beneficial fire workforce, the off-season workforce that's going to do all the things we need to do to prepare landscapes to accept fire in a safe and manageable way. But before we get there, we've got to help the people that show up on the bad days. And I would just say this is a place where our community's fallen short, and I think it will actually impede adoption of technology. When I talk to hotshots, they're sort of like, wait a second, you're telling me you're launching a satellite constellation, but you can't pay me more than $18 an hour? Go to hell, right? And I think that's a major issue that we need to think about as a community and show up for these people who are truly sacrificing their lives. And I don't mean that in the most literal sense, but like, if I'm a father of 2, if I had to go to work for 6 months a year and not really see my family, that would count as a major sacrifice. And that's what these folks do every season. Another, I get upset about this. And we actually published a report in our institute about the workforce issues, and would, please take a look if you're interested. Lots of other people. The Fire Commission is full of recommendations on this. We need to figure out a way to do it, to make the federal workforce a sustainable career that doesn't break people's either physically or mentally, and allows them to flourish and have families and even modern families that are to career. So another place where we've made progress, but not enough, I would argue, is in the use of beneficial fire. We're putting more good acres, putting fire on the ground. This is a picture of the Caples Ecosystem Restoration Project in the middle of the Caldor fire footprint. Many folks may know that this is kind of a shining example of what good things happen when you're able to put fire on the ground at scale, in terms of keeping ecosystems intact and also helping in the defense of Kirkwood, slow things down, give the fire services opportunities to stage on 88. And we need to do more of that, enough to matter. Right now, I think we're in a phase where, outside of maybe firing operations, we're not putting enough on the ground to matter. And the scale of the challenge is massive. California is a big place. It is not, and we need to find ways to do much more than we're doing. I'd also note, this is I think a particularly vivid portrait of a home that, for reasons that have more to do with termites than wildfire risk, received what we in California would call a wildfire hardening treatment. And it served it well, I guess, if you would want to live there surrounded by this. This is the home in Lahaina that had lava rock put around the foundation, so it had a zone 0. It had a metal roof installed, and that was really about it. Zone 0 did the work in an ember-driven firestorm to prevent ignition. I guess maybe also setback, and probably a fair dose of luck. But we are falling short on doing the things we need to do to prevent conflagration in California. This is hard work. There is a reason that it has not happened, right? People don't like it when you tell them to take out the rose bush or my neighbor's juniper bushes that go right up to his house. It's politically incredibly challenging. At the same time, we're observing a context in which the insurance market in California is falling apart, and people are not going to be able to sell their houses. The value of their homes has been impacted. We have data that shows that values in high fire risk areas across California, not just where fires have been, but where fires might occur in future, are significantly impacted by the risk to structures and the perception of that in the real estate market. We need to find ways to make progress. We have not made enough progress over the last 5 years. And I guess the last thing I'd say is we've made a start on changing the culture. Everyone has been talking about this. This is a picture from Florida, a very high wildfire risk state, but for the fact that they put a ton of fire on the ground. And this is like a field trip happening where the kids are out in their normal clothes at a prescribed fire, enjoying the view and learning about why prescribed fire in Florida is so important to keeping their communities safe, and how prescribed fire is actually a safe thing, and it's okay to do, and it's not something to be, fire isn't necessarily something to be afraid of. We need to get to this place in California, and we're not there yet. We've made a big start. The media has been a really important force in this, I think, in starting to introduce narratives. The fire services have done a great job. I thought the communications around the Caldor fire, I about fell out of my chair when the fire services were producing videos to show how the Caples Lake ecosystem project had created benefits and how the fuels treatments in and around Myers and Christmas Valley had produced real benefits. We need to do a better job telling our story, because ultimately public support for the things that we need to do to change how the world looks in California is only going to happen if we have stories and narratives that go beyond not one more spark. So what should we achieve? I want to wake up in 5 years and have a happy federal fire service that's well supported, that has career paths that allow men and women to have 2 career families and know their children, and not depend on a partner when they have to leave for 14 days at a time with 2 days off for an entire 6-month fire season. I want to have better mental health care for our firefighters, better, especially for the seasonal folks, if we still have those people, if they haven't become full-time employees because they're doing prescribed fire in the off-season or fuels treatments. And I want to, I'll never forget, I was with Kate at a meeting that that Jenny Kwang organized, and meeting the Fire Forward team. Kate said, "This reminds me of when I was young, when firefighting was really fun," and I want to make firefighting fun again, and that means changing the work environment for firefighters to make it a sustainable job where they go and they do the thing that is so valuable for our society, but we don't ask so much of them that it breaks too many of their spirits. Like, I think we owe that to the workforce. I think the experience in South Lake Tahoe between the Angora fire and the Caldor fire just is the ultimate demonstration of the value of community investment in preparation, and that happened in South Lake Tahoe because there's money in South Lake Tahoe. We need to find a way to do this for all the rural communities in California, and that is something that we can achieve in the next 5 years. It is hard, but that is where we need to go. And that's essential to having stable insurance markets, it's stable communities, stable electric utilities, fighting climate change. We need to do this, and I think we can. And we're making progress. It's not fast enough, but that, to me, is the stretch goal. That's my key result for 5 years from now. Because of where I work, and this guy gave us a lot of money, this guy Dor, and now I have to think in OKRs, and so I'm like, that's my world. So that's my key result on communities. The other thing I'd say is I'm hopeful that in the next 5 years we can scale beneficial fire partly by changing, or not so much changing, but creating new metrics for the fire services and other actors in the fire space to evaluate their performance. But I am hopeful that this is just a picture from the Bootleg fire. Just that is the place where fire and thinning had occurred, as opposed to thinning and nothing. And you can see the fire effects are quite different across that gradient. And I'm hopeful that we can really make progress on this. Maybe not at fully landscape scale, but that we start to see large areas of California where enough fire has been on the ground to recreate a fuels mosaic, to allow and create tolerance for low-intensity fire when it occurs. And I'm hopeful that we can start to do that near where people live. I live in Marin. I'm looking at Mark sitting right there. And he, for those of you who don't know, runs the Marin Wildfire Protection Authority. And Marin is a bullseye for the insurance industry. And the Ross Valley is a place where there are there are burn perimeters from the 1940s, from back when the Ross Valley was a ranch. And Jenny, this is the front row. Mark's there. Jenny Biggs, who lives in Ross, is right there. I live in Marin as well, and I worry very much that we're living in a time before a Tubbs fire-like event. And we're seeing the beginnings of actions that are going to prevent that are going to put us on a different fork. And I hope that by 5 years from now, as we look back, we'll say, here are the things we did that prevented something like that from happening in Marin, from something like that from happening again in Sonoma or Napa. And so many of the people in this room are actually helping us take that turn off of the road we're on, and I'm deeply grateful for all of your work. The last thing I'd say is that in the next 5 years, I do want to see cultural change. I love this image of a girl setting fire, right? Putting fire on the ground. This is a cultural burn from Northern California. And, the kids are welcome, right? Because fire of this sort isn't dangerous. It doesn't necessarily require Nomex. And changing fire culture, starting to make a dent in this blue, which is the fire return interval deficit in the Sierra and Klamath, would be a tremendous achievement. And that's going to take cultural change. It's going to take new stories. It's going to take teaching our kids that fire is a force like rain, sometimes to be welcomed, sometimes to be feared. And that really starts with education and storytelling, and I'm hopeful that over the next few years we can all do a better job of that. Thank you.